Welcome everyone. In this video, we're going to be talking about when should you consider writing your academic book. Now, obviously for some of you, right, that's going to be as soon as you're done with your dissertation, all right? So the first thing to consider is a book valued in your department? For some disciplines, it is a book that is what gets you tenure, right? Or it is a couple of books that's what you need for tenure. But for others, that's not the case, right? For others, it's writing those research pieces, right, that gets you tenure, right? Or it might be your teaching evaluations, right, and your pedagogical practices. That's really what gets you tenure, all right? So obviously, if you're in a situation where you need one or more books to get tenure, you're going to get on this like right away, okay? That's a no-brainer. But if you're in a situation where you don't need a book to get tenure, and in fact, other things are valued, but maybe you have an idea for a book or an editor has approached you and said, hey, I think you'd be really cool. I think you'd be a really great person to write this book. What is it that you need to think of? What is it that you need to consider, particularly when you are pre-tenure? So once you get past understanding what is and is not valued, right? Let's say that, you know, getting a book is not something that's going to get you tenure, right? You got, like, for me, getting a book wasn't going to get me tenure. It was a cherry on top, but I didn't need a book to get tenure. What I needed was publications in top tier journals, okay? Other people, right, if you're at a more teaching-based institution, right, it's your teaching that matters. And maybe, yes, you have to publish minimally, but a book isn't going to get you, right, tenure if your teaching isn't stellar, right? So you have to weigh all of those options. So I did have an editor for my first book come to me. I think I was in my second year off of the, on the tenure track, and talked to me about writing a book. And I was really, really excited about this book, but I knew it wasn't what was going to get me tenure. And so in that instance, I requested, and you can absolutely do this, I requested to the editor, I told him, I totally want to write this book. I am super interested in doing this, but here's my deal as far as the tenure track goes. I've got to get these research publications. That's what gets me tenure. So I want to put the book off, and I put the book off until like maybe my fourth year, because by that time, I'd already secured a number of research publications, right? So keep in mind too that little side note here, like when I was on my way from assistant to associate, my mentality was I wanted to slide into home plate, right? I did not want to be an assistant professor that was running around super freaked out, super stressed out in that last year or two. I wanted to really work my butt off and get a lot of good, high quality publications in my first 3 years so that I could taper off a little bit, not slack off, right? But like I was probably doing way more than I needed to in the first 3 years to sort of relieve some stress, right? So I could see, yes, I'm going to get tenure and I can ease off a little bit. And when I got to that point where I was clearly going to have enough publications to get tenure, I could ease off that a little bit, and that freed up that space to write a book. So for me, when I went up for tenure, I had, I did that book near the end and I dropped the proofs into my tenure file, okay? But it wasn't published. So think about that, right? Think about if you have an idea or you're approached by an editor and a book is not valued, it's not going to get you tenure, then think about how you might put that off a little bit until either you get tenure or you get closer to it. Now, the other thing, once you're like, okay, I have tenure, or, well, we won't say if you have to write a book, because if you have to write a book for tenure, you have to write a book for tenure. But if you're in that other camp where you don't, then what are some other things you need to think about? So you definitely want to look at the other existing commitments that you have in your life. So what do I mean by that, right? Because you want to think about how is a book going to fit into these commitments? So you want to think about, right, if you've got a big grant that just came in, if you're in the middle of a heavy duty research project, these things are all about balance, okay? And you have to think about how much time is this book going to take up? And that depends, right, on the kind of book that you have. So right now I'm getting ready to move into a new contract and I'm getting ready to write a book. I will be the only author for this book. I have an editor that I will work closely with, but I'm it. Okay. It's the first time that I've had that. And I'm expecting to spend 15 to 20 hours a week on my book. I'm expecting to be able to produce one really solid draft, like high quality draft of a chapter each month. Okay. But I'm also the only author. The other book that I have going on right now is an edited book. the second editor. So I don't have to run the show, but I do have responsibilities. And in that sense, right, I had to write one chapter and I'm overseeing, I don't know, like 3 or 4 other people and and I'm responsible for making sure those 3 or 4 people stay on their deadlines. I read their stuff, I give them feedback. If I have questions or things I want the other editors to see, I pull them in. But my responsibilities are pretty manageable, okay? And for that workload it really kind of comes in spurts. Okay, so I can actually do a lot around that. I feel okay taking on a second book because my third book, right, this new book where I'm the sole author, because the second book that I'm working on right now is going to pretty much be close to being wrapped up by the time that I start writing, my sole author book. So I feel pretty good about that. So you have to sort of keep in mind the big picture, where different projects fall on the timeline and what is going to be manageable for you. The other thing that I will point out with writing a book, and when you think about doing it, is, you cannot take the summer off, okay, from writing a book, okay? I cannot say to the publishing house, well, June, July, I'm not on contract, so I won't be working on my book. What they care about is meeting their deadline, okay? So if I'm able to write the book and meet the deadline in such a way that I don't have to write in the summer, okay, hey, that's great, but I already know that's not going to be the case with me and how I like to write. I know that I will be working at least, 3 or 4 half days in the summer, most weeks, to get that book done to meet the fall deadline that I believe we're going to set. So think about how much time commitment you're expecting, and think about the nature of your role and how that time plays out. Okay, so for the book that I'm an editor of, right, we have more intense periods of time. For the book that I'm going to be the sole author of, it's going to be like this regular, I say slow and steady, right? Even though it's 15 to 20 hours a week is what I'm estimating, right? It's constant. It's not going to be, for the most part, super intensive. There will be some downtime probably when my editor's looking at something, but when my editor's looking at something, I'm probably going to be working on something else. Okay. So I'm thinking about, am I the only author for this? Am I one of several? What are my responsibilities? How much time does that take? And what does this look like in the big picture, right? That'll help you know when a generally good time is. So you can make the argument that there might not be a good time to write a book, and I can certainly get that. But I think there are times that are better than others. So like right now, if somebody came to me and said, hey, I have an idea for you, right, to write a book, I would say I can't do it right now because I have my edited book, I have the book I'm getting ready to contract with, and I have other projects and pieces in the work. So I'm maxed out. So that's another important thing. Know where your line in the sand is. Know where you are maxed out. And that doesn't mean you have to turn down other opportunities that come your way. But it might mean that you have to sort of push them off, right? And wait a little bit longer than maybe you want, or if an editor has approached you, maybe more so than what the editor wants. But that can be okay, potentially. But in general, make sure that, when you're thinking about, is it time to start writing a book, right? Make sure if you're pre-tenure, it's going to help the tenure process. Make sure it doesn't impede it, okay? Make sure that you have the time and attention to give to it, right? Because you want to make sure you have that time and attention necessary to write it and write it well.